I want to thank you for the welcome, Dan. You know, last week, Dan gave us a little bit of an icebreaker on gambling. He did touch on it, and he did call it gaming last week as well. And I chuckled at the time. Why? Because I thought he was dating himself. You see, we're a little word history here. I need to turn on my speaker. A little word history. The word gaming goes back to the 1500s. And British aristocracy used to call it gaming for the same reason that it's gaining popularity again today, because it's a more pleasant way to say gambling. And so, not knowing that it had made a resurgence in our country, I was thinking of like the 1700s with some gentleman going into the gaming parlor. And so when Dan said gaming, I said, wow, that's... But they are one and the same, and so they are synonymous. A couple of years ago, I was on a fire, and I heard people talking about this ultra MAGA truck that was driving around the camp. And I know this sounds like a change of topic, but you'll see in just a moment. And there was a lot of buzz. It was like this thing, the ultra MAGA truck. Everyone talked about this ultra MAGA guy. And like I was just doing my job, wasn't really paying attention. Well, eventually he needed something from me, and he rolls up, and he did have a MAGA truck. It was this big, probably 1.5 ton, big red truck, full-size bed, 4 doors. And it even had stickers that said Ultra MAGA on it. And so as he comes up, he's got a smile on his face, just walking casually. And I sort of expected that we might talk politics, just taking the first glance and after hearing everyone talk. But after we exchanged the first pleasantries and I had taken care of business, from the fire side of things, rather than getting into politics, he asked me, "Do you gamble?" I thought, well, no, I don't, sir. He said, well, you should. And he started going into all of the pros, all of the advantages to gambling. And we got into a little bit of a discussion where we did not agree, but it was a very civil conversation. And after a few minutes, I quickly realized that I wasn't going to make any headway on changing his mind about how great gambling is. In fact, I realized that I wasn't going to really help him with his addiction, because it became apparent in the course of the conversation that he had an addiction to gambling. And it was most likely the primary reason he was on that fire in the first place. He was trying to make money to support that addiction. Gambling is not a common topic that we talk about in the Christian circle. I haven't actually been present at a sermon, physically present, where someone has spoken directly about gambling, except for last week when Dan talked about it. That was the first time, I think, that I've heard someone really, really speak to it. So it's not a common topic as far as how do we direct our lives as Christians? How do we live as Christians? What's the right way to do things? And when I had that conversation a couple years back, I had thought about the concept of gambling from a kid. But that was the first time that I kind of wondered, how should I respond as a Christian? I don't think I told the guy anything wrong, but it got me really thinking, as a Christian, what is the Christian response to gambling? Is it okay? Is it not okay? Is there some sort of gray in the middle? No scripture explicitly states, "Thou shalt not gamble." It's not something you see in the 10 Commandments explicitly written as such, and you don't see a command as such that you shall not gamble. Does the silence in that case, where it's not explicit, does silence give us liberty to engage in gaming? Is the Bible truly silent on the matter? So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to define, first of all, what is gambling. It does come with definition. We need to understand what it is we're talking about. And we then are going to go through and consider a number of biblical principles that can help direct our lives with respect to the concept of gaming. And then we're going to finish by concluding what does God think about this? What would Jesus say or do about this? And I don't expect that we're going to get through everything today, so if I might ask the men for maybe another week, I'd like to come back next week perhaps and finish it. So let's talk about the definition first. If you're to look up the definition, here it is in quotes. Gambling is the betting or staking of something of value with consciousness of risk and hope of gain on the outcome of a game or a contest or some uncertain event whose result may be determined by chance or accident or have an unexpected result by reason of the bettor's miscalculation. So I'll read that one more time, a little more slowly. You're betting or you're staking, same thing, something of value. You know that there's a risk that you're going to lose what you bet. But you also have a hope that you're going to gain more than you bet. And it's on the outcome of some sort of game, whether you're playing a game of cards or you're rolling dice or any other myriad of ways that it can be done. But it's an uncertain event, so you don't know the outcome. When you roll the dice, you don't know what's going to be face up. When you flip the card, you don't know what you're going to get. So it's an uncertain event, and it's determined by chance. It's random. It's not something that's rigged that you know the answer to. And you can have unexpected results. You might be betting on a certain outcome, but you don't know if your prediction will be correct or not. And so ultimately there are three components that define gambling. First, you have to have this uncertain, random event, whether it's a throw of the dice, for example. You have to put down a wager or a bet. It's something of value. Typically, we use money. And that wager is based on a chance of a particular outcome. So you're hoping for a certain outcome. You're betting that something particular will happen with that arbitrary event. And of course, you have the intent to win something. Usually, this something of value is money, 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 like that picture there. A couple slides back, this guy is having a great time, isn't he? Even his teeth are glittering. This is just a commercial type of thing, but it works. I mean, the guy, he's vibrant, he's excited, money's flying everywhere, he's got aces in the background, sevens everywhere. So you're going there to win something. But it's more than just winning. There's a winner and a loser. And so the winner, by definition, wins at the direct loss of the loser. So these are the three primary components to gambling. Well, what do we do when there isn't a clear or explicit command? We can't find thou shalt not gamble, thou shalt not game in the Bible. When there isn't a clear or explicit command, there are other ways that we can ascertain God's intent for us to direct our lives. We can look at examples in the Bible. We can make inferences from other commands. And we can ultimately look at other principles that are talked about with these other commands, with these other examples. You can use biblical principles to make inferences about how we're to live our lives. So the first thing I'd like to ask this morning is, what generally motivates people to gamble? This guy I talked to a couple of years ago, I said, well, surely you spend a lot of money. I mean, you're probably losing it too. He said, oh no, I win. I won $3,000. I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago. I don't remember. And another time I won $4,000. What's the motivation behind that? Well, he's wanting the money. Of course, the money is central to the concept of gambling. But is it not greed? Is it not covetousness? The word covet, from Bible definition, it means to take pleasure in. It means to delight in something with evil motivation. It also means to desire that which does not belong to you. It means also to lust after something. Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. This is a command from the commandments. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. So, bottom line, you shall not covet. Period. Do not covet anything. Do not want or delight in that which does not belong to you, or to take excessive pleasure in something. In fact, the New Testament warns us against covetousness as well. If you were to go to Luke chapter 12, verse 15, in Jesus' own words, and he said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. We are to be on our guard against all covetousness. I don't know if any of you have heard a song. It goes back to 1972. It's a Joel Gray and Liza Minnelli. It says, the title is Money Makes the World Go Round. I don't know if any of you have heard that. I tried. I couldn't make it through the whole song. It's a terrible song, I think. But it was very popular at the time. And there's, I'm sure, many different renditions of it. But many people truly believe the concept that money makes the world go round. And in a non-spiritual sense, it does. When people are just thinking about themselves, thinking about what they could have and what they really what they want, this excessive desire, this greed. Yeah, that does make the world go round. But as Christians, are we not to be separate and sanctified from things of this world? And that we should be purifying ourselves for the next, for the spiritual world. Let's take a look back at Luke chapter 12, verses 16 through 20. So we just read verse 15. So he says, Beware of all covetousness, and now Jesus tells them a parable. The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits. And he said, This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. You see, in this parable, the fool relied on wealth and material gain. This is a story of a wealthy, he was already wealthy, but he became more wealthy, and in order to adjust for that, he just built bigger and better things. But he never got to enjoy it. He was at the end of his life. His soul was required of him. He had to die. And he never got to enjoy all of that which he built up for himself. You see, he couldn't take it with him. He should have stored up for God instead. He should have focused his energies on that. Let's take a look. Proverbs has a way of saying things very directly. Let's go back to Proverbs chapter 23. Proverbs chapter 23, We'll read verses 4 and 5. Labor not to be rich. Cease from thine own wisdom. Wilt thou set your eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. It's pointless. It's nugatory, futile to labor, to work, to become rich. And if you were to read in the New King James Version, it actually says there to overwork to be rich. So you're talking about people who are working themselves hard for material gain, just like this wealthy guy in Luke chapter 12. He was laboring hard for himself for material gain. But it says here not to overwork to be rich. What happens when we do that? What happens when we focus all our attention on this dollar? I've heard people say the almighty dollar. We have an almighty, and it's not the dollar. Go back to Exodus chapter 20 again. We're back to our 10 Commandments. I'm going back to that on purpose because we've looked at one. Now we're going to look at a couple others. Verses 3 and 4 of Exodus 20. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. When we allow covetousness, when we allow greed, when we allow excessive, extravagant desires into our life, and when that, if it's money, for example, when that gets in the way of us serving God, it becomes idolatry. We're serving something else aside from God. So now we're breaking multiple commandments. Think of, I don't know, you may have met somebody along life's path, those chronic schemers, someone who's always trying to get rich fast, someone who's always scheming some sort of way to get rich quick or hastily. Proverbs 13, verse 11. Wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall have increase. Some versions may say wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but he that gathers by labor, by working with your own hands, will have increase. And that we're not talking about becoming super uber wealthy. We're talking about laboring bit by bit. You're increasing little by little. You don't need to be the wealthiest person in the world. It's not wrong to earn money as long as it's done the right way, through labor. So with that, we can look again. We can go back to Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, where it says that you cannot serve both God and money. And why would we have a scripture like that? Well, because money gets in the way of serving God. And it's been like that through the ages. Nothing has changed. Money, our attachment to money, by allowing that lust, that greed, that covetousness to enter our hearts, that's always been an issue with humanity. Well, that leads us to the topic of lust. Lust for money does get in the way of serving God. Now, let's think about gambling again. Gambling is a rush for many people who do gamble. And why? Because it's thrilling. It's exciting. Did you see that guy, that picture on the guy? He was just winning big. It is thrilling. It's exciting. And it's even more exciting if you win, right? I just got this boatload of money. I just won it. It just happened just like that. I guessed right and it just happened, you know? Well, it's like an adrenaline junkie. You know, those who are hooked on like diving out of airplanes, jumping off of cliffs, skydiving, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, I just read a news article within the last couple of days. There was an avid rock climber, Uprising Star. You may have heard about him. And he fell to his death at Yosemite. He had been all over the world scaling some very, very, very difficult climbs. And they're not sure exactly what happened, but according to his brother, they think that he had already finished the climb. He'd made it to the top. And he was going back and forth to retrieve his gear, and they think that he might have rappelled off the end of his rope. And it was a 2,400-foot climb. So there was no coming back from that fall when you're at the top. It's like the adrenaline junkie. Gambling produces similar physical effects on your body, on the person who is gambling. When you win, you're just absolutely thrilled. You're just shaking with excitement. But what happens when you lose? Well, it's a deep depression. It's real. Gambling is addictive. We see that greed and covetousness plays in harmony with lust. And lust, by its very nature, is addictive. Gambling is addictive. You might get into a sports game or a particular team on a particular sports event, and you might really get into watching this game on the television. Well, the difference between you and the living room, you might be even jumping off your couch. You say, yeah, go. You just scored a touchdown, just scored a point or a goal or whatever. The gambler is in the game. You see, they're entering this passion, and they're experiencing the pleasures to a greater degree than if you're maybe watching the football game. Just as someone may be addicted to drugs, gamblers are addicted to the high of prospective winnings. Some, unfortunately, become compulsive. That means they completely lose their self-control. And they can become completely enslaved to that activity. Some people have a particular game of choice, whether it's blackjack or otherwise. Some people have the game that they love. Maybe some of you have met gamblers throughout time, and there's one thing that I've noticed. They don't talk about their losses. You hear about their winnings. And if they've lost anything, they're probably not ready to admit it. You might catch them if they're in a depressed state. You might be able to get them to admit it at that point in time. But if they just come away and they might have won a little bit, you're not going to know necessarily how much they've spent to win whatever they won. And you're not going to know how much they've spent over the course of perhaps years, or how much they may have lost. They're focused on the wins. They kind of forget about the losses. They don't talk about those. Romans chapter 6, verse 16. The Apostle Paul stated there that you are the slave of that same one you obey, either of sin, resulting in death, or of obedience, resulting in righteousness. If we are obeying this urge, this deep desire to gamble, are we not slave to that desire, a slave to the prospect of winning a bunch of money? Are we allowing that to replace other wholesome aspects that our lives could be? Have you ever heard of Gamblers Anonymous? Just like Alcoholics Anonymous, GA is a thing too. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 12 provides us some further support to this topic of lust. It reads there, I will not be dominated by anything. Some versions you might say, you will not be brought under the power or mastered by anything, even if it's permitted or lawful. So even if it's, the law of the land, which by the way, technically you can gamble in Idaho. fact, the state supports the Idaho Lotto. It's a state-run situation. If you go across the border into Montana, you see casinos everywhere. So technically gambling is legal. What 1 Corinthians 6 verse 12 here is saying, that you will not be under the power of anything, even if it is lawful, even if it is permitted. So the law of the land does say it's okay to gamble. But what happens if you become attached to gambling? What happens if you're engaging in this activity? Gambling may be permitted by law, technically speaking, but I would ask you, how is it helpful? How is it profitable? In fact, when you're speaking about addiction, addiction in any form is destructive and has a potential to lead to utter ruin. Addiction starts small. A lot of times it just starts really small. Some people can jump in pretty quick, but it typically starts as something small, and you know what? Maybe it stays small. Maybe it doesn't fully blow up on you. Maybe you don't lose everything. You do not need to be completely enslaved for something to have power or authority over you. You do not need to be utterly dominated or mastered by anything for it to be counterproductive to a Christian lifestyle, for it to be unprofitable, for it to be less than helpful. The actual bar for sin is lower than being completely dominated by something, is it not? A little sin is still a sin. 1 Corinthians 6 here in this case, what I read, it's speaking there specifically to sexual immorality. But remember, there's a principle here, a greater principle here for us to remember. Because it goes on to say that we are a temple of the Holy Spirit which resides in us. And furthermore, we're not our own. We belong to God. So think about this. If we indeed are a temple of the Holy Spirit, why would we taint that by engaging in an activity that is destructive by nature, that is addictive by nature, that can trigger multiple breaks in the commandments of God? Why would we even touch it? We don't belong to ourselves. You know, a lot of times you talk about becoming an adult, and I was talking to someone recently about, well, when you grow up, you get a job, you can buy what you want. Do what you want when you're an adult. And yeah, there are certain freedoms that you can talk about, but if you're thinking in a spiritual sense, we really don't belong to ourselves. We belong to God. So is it not therefore our responsibility, our obligation to find out the best way to serve God? We'll cover one more biblical principle here before we end. We're going to talk about work ethic. You see, gambling ignores the concept of working for what we have. There are several biblically legitimate ways to acquire money. We can work for it. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12 speak to that. We can see that in 2 Thessalonians as well. Let's turn there quickly so we can read those. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 11. It says there to study to be quiet and to do your own business and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you, that you may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that you may have lack of nothing. So we're talking about honest gain, working with your own hands for honest gain. And then in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, you see a similar statement again. For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. Are you really working when you're gambling? You're really, are you actually working honestly with your own hands? Let's say you win something. That's good news, right? Well, whose money did you just take? You took from the guy that lost. Well, you can work for your money. Well, you can also barter and exchange your goods. We see this concept back in Deuteronomy, chapter 25. If we turn there really quickly, let's take a brief look at that. Deuteronomy chapter 25, and we'll read verses 13 through 16. Thou shalt not have in thy bags diverse weights, a great and a small. Thou shalt not have in thine house diverse measures, a great and a small. But thou shalt have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure shalt thou have, that thy days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. For all that do such things, and all that do unrighteously, are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. So that's a little bit of a complex one, but let me break it down for you. What they're talking about here is the fact that you can do good business, that you can barter in exchange for goods. And they would do this in those days with weights. So they're talking about diverse measures and diverse weights. So, for example, if you were selling or buying something in accordance to a certain price per weight, let's say it's $1 per pound per se, well, if back in those days they would have measured it out by weight, so they've had these stones. And so if you were to buy with like a double weight, for example, you could use, let's say you had a 2-pound stone, but you buy something using that 2-pound stone weight, but you're buying it as if it's 1 pound. Well, then you're coming away with double what you really, should have paid. You should have paid double, but you didn't. You paid half the price. And so back in those days, people could be kind of sneaky about it. They could use different stones that maybe was a little less weight or is a little more weight. And if you were selling by the half weight, let's say you were selling something, if you had a half-pound stone, but you're selling it as if it's a 1 pound, then you're making double what you should have. So when they were weighing things out back then, you can barter in exchange for goods, but you've got to do it with it properly measured so that you're not cheating the customer. So you can barter in exchange for goods. You can work, you can barter in exchange. And there is another way to obtain money. It can be through benevolence too. Remember in Acts chapter 2, verses 44 and 45, the early church, they had all things in common. They were helping each other out. It was a big deal. And people were selling possessions to help each other out. Verse 44 of Acts chapter 2, it says, And all that believed were together and had all things common. And they sold their possessions and goods and parted them to all men as every man had need. What a beautiful picture that is. They were helping each other out. They're helping other people out. So benevolence is a good thing too. And this congregation, I know, practices that very well. So there are legitimate ways to acquire money. The Bible speaks to working for it. You can barter in exchange for it. And you can do it through benevolence. But a situation like gambling is not contemplated in the Bible. And so, what is gambling? It's an attempt to short-circuit the system, isn't it? It's an attempt to acquire other people's money without having to work for it or giving anything in exchange for it. Just another get-money-quick scheme. And my question for you as we end for this session of gambling, as Christians, how can we take advantage of others with good conscience and be in good standing with God when the Bible authorizes specific ways to acquire money and excludes gambling? This is only the first part. I do have at least one more sermon left, and we do have some other biblical principles to cover. But for this morning, we can suffice it to say that we've got greed, covetousness, and lust. They all sort of work together. We've also got the fact that with lust, gambling is addictive. And it's enough that there is an organization called Gamblers Anonymous. And the Bible is very specific in how we can earn money, and gambling is not one of those means by which we can earn money. So there is a work ethic concept as well. With that, I hope you have been encouraged so far. I hope you look forward to next week, as do I. If there are any among our number that have any needs, whatever they might be, believer or otherwise, if you need to express a faith in God through obedience in baptism, if you have prayer requests, etc., I encourage you to please come forward as we stand and sing.